Blender for Noobs.
Hello, this is Dan Nobles and welcome to Blender for Noobs and welcome to this video on the making of the Gobekli Tepe model. Imagine my surprise when a friend contacted me and said that he was watching a documentary and he saw something that he thought was one of my models that I created in Blender. And I thought, no, he must be mistaken. So I went and looked at this documentary. It's called The Story of God, and it has Morgan Freeman in it. And they've actually used my Gobekli Tepe model in it, which was very, very cool. The Gobekli Tepe model I have on TurboSquid, so that's how it was purchased and used. So it's really, really a satisfaction for an artist in Blender to see something that they actually put together, they modeled themselves, and it's being used in, something that's kind of a professional production. And so when I seen it, it's like, wow, that's really, really cool. So what they did is when you purchase a model on TurboSquid, unless you have special rights on it, they can use it for purposes of putting it in a film or whatever. So I had a lot of people come to me and say, well, you should, get Morgan Freeman to give you a lot of money for this. And no, it doesn't work that way. What they do is they purchase the model, and actually an effects house probably somewhere purchased the model, and then the producers behind the show hire the effects house to come up with a scene or whatever, and then the effects house goes and purchases the model themselves and uses it. And what they did with the model is pretty cool. They used the basic model, but they also added some animation to it, as you've seen in the first clip that I showed you there. They actually put some fire in the middle of it. It was pretty neat to see that come to life like that. So I thought what I'd do is kind of give an idea of how I came up with this idea and how it kind of progressed to what it is now. So I guess I could start with, how did I come up with the idea of making this Gobekli Tepe model? Well, I learned about this site. It's a site in southeastern Turkey. I learned about it a few years ago, and when I first learned about it, it's like I was just amazed. Here's this site that they found that is, over 9,000 years old. It's not supposed to, it doesn't fit with, or didn't fit with the current understanding of man's progression through history. At the time when everybody was supposed to be hunter-gatherers, we had a group of people who built this site and had to kind of band together to plan this out, to actually work together to construct it. And they think it's a ritualistic temple type of place, but nobody really knows exactly what the purpose of this place was. People are looking at it like trying to see if they have certain alignments to the stars. I don't personally subscribe to that theory. I think you can just about make anything here fit your theory about how it aligns to the stars. But there's just a lot of theories about what the site was, and it's just really, really cool. So I started thinking, wouldn't it be cool if I could actually model this site and have a model for this? And going into it, I knew that it was going to be an extremely big task to do this, but I thought I'm going to try it out. I thought about it, and I actually put it off for maybe a year because I thought, this is just really more than I need to take on. But finally, I decided to go forward with it, and I'll kind of show you kind of a slideshow here of screenshots of how this kind of evolved when I was working on it. Okay, so this is the first screenshot that I have of Gobekli Tepe model that I was going to be working on. But before I did this, I went and I watched as many videos as I could. I found lectures of the original archaeologist that was at the site at the time. Unfortunately, he's now passed away. His name was Dr. Klaus Schmidt. So I watched a lot of his lectures. I read all the information I could get because, the site is there's still a lot we don't know about the site, and there's a lot not published. So I started just, grabbing every bit of information that I could possibly get, doing research to try to, I wanted to make a model that was as true to the site as I could. I knew it wouldn't be perfect because you can't get every little stone placed just right, and you can't get all the measurements because they're just not available. But I wanted to get it as close as possible. So this is what I started out with. Basically this is just a circle, a plain circle. And I thought, how am I going to do all these stones? Because if I try to do all these stones individually, it's going to be just a massive amount of polygons, and it's going to be a really, really lot of, ton of work. So I thought, well, what I'll do is I'll, make a circular enclosure, and then I'll get a texture, and then I will put the texture on there, and I'll use that for the stone. So when I did this, I thought, okay, that's interesting. Maybe it could work. So if we go to the next one, then I took the same thing, and I don't know if you can tell with this image, but I used bump mapping to make it look a little bit more realistic. So I thought, okay, well, it's possible that this could be used. It's really too even for the site, because the site is basically, it's in various states of decomposition. So you have stones that are falling, different ways, stones that are kind of broken up against the wall and things like that. So this would be really too perfect, but this is, some tests that I was doing to try to figure it out. Okay, so this is, by the way, this enclosure here is Enclosure D that I was working on. I thought that, I could try to do the entire site, but I thought that is really, really taking on too much. And then I came up with the idea that, I'll try to do just one of the enclosures. And this is, Enclosure D is kind of like I guess the most well-preserved enclosure. Anyway, it looked like that to me. I was drawn to that one because the reliefs on the pillars, the pictures of the animals and things that are there are really, really cool. And I thought this is the enclosure I wanted to try to do. So these pillars here, which you make, call them T-shapes. These shapes here are just basically stand-ins that I created. I created this basic T-shape, and I kind of put them in where they might fall, on the actual model. Really has placeholders. So here in this image, you can see that I started testing the texture out. So I put this texture on this one pillar here, and I thought, that's pretty good. It's kind of like that kind of a rocky kind of texture on it. And it's funny how when you first do something and you start getting excited about it, you think, oh yeah, that's what I want. And then as you continue to work with it and you look at your reference images, you think, no, I really want something better. I want it to be more, look more like it resembles the actual stonework. So, but this is the texture I originally came up with to try. And this is just another shot. Well, here you can see that I did away with the texture wall that I was doing. And I started actually creating my own blocks here, bricks or stones, whatever you want to call them, for the enclosure. And I knew that was really, I was really putting my foot in it, because that means that I'm going to have to create stonework. There's going to be a stone. Each stone that you see is actually a separate model. But I just knew, at that point that the texture thing that I was trying to do before just didn't look realistic enough. So I started creating these stones. You can see it's kind of a duplication of the stones that I did here, and just another close-up of this texture. Also, you can see very clearly how, the stones would look better if they were actual models, but you can see that definitely they can't be duplicated the way that I was duplicating them. So here you can see I'm kind of messing around with my stonework here for the enclosure. And what I did is I created rings for this stonework, and I started kind of rotating them to get them to look a little bit different and get a kind of a varied look to them, because I didn't want them to look that contrived where they're all, look like they were come off an assembly line or something. It just didn't look realistic. So here's that stonework along with the rest of the pillars here. And you can see, or hopefully see, that it's starting to look a little bit better. It's actually actual 3D models for the stonework, but they are still, you know, it looks like something that was built yesterday. It doesn't look like a site that, you know, is thousands of years old. So had to do something to that as well. And just another angle there of this site. And then I decided that, you know, I was looking at this texture and I decided, okay, you know, I thought maybe that would be it, but I really want to try something different. So I started working on this texture again, and came up with this. And when I came up with this, I'm like, oh yeah, that's really cool. I like that. That's going to work. And then you can see I started also working on some relief work here. The relief work that I did, this is bump mapping. I did every single relief on these pillars by hand. And what I mean by that is it wasn't something that I took an image and used that image for the bump mapping. I actually traced it out and created these bump maps by hand. It was a lot of fun actually to do that. And it was challenging because I had to find a way to do it that would work where it would look good for the site. And we're not there yet, but this is what I had at the time. So you can see, you know, some of the other pillars here, or this other pillar that I was starting to work on. This texture that I have here, I was excited about it, but I could start to see, wait a minute, that looks really very smooth. You know, it's way too smooth for the type of stone or the look of the stone that was there. So we'll go on to the next one. And so here you can see I decided to change the texture yet a third major time. And when I got to this texture, I knew. It's like, okay, I got what I'm looking for, because this stone texture, if you look at this texture, it's got like, you know, it looks like it's got pitted areas in it. It's got a nice variance to it. I actually created some nodes specially so that I could get, you can kind of see kind of like orangish type of coloring, discoloring to it. So there's some variations there. You can still see the relief here. So when I got this, I thought, okay, that is it. That's what I'm looking for. I can kind of play around with the color, you know, how it looks and everything, but the actual texture and everything, I was very happy with. So this is just another pillar that I was working on. And by the way, these snake things that are coming down here, these are actually modeled into that pillar. Some of the reliefs that I did, wasn't really practical to model it into the relief, so I did them separate, but these are actually modeled into this. And this shape here is actually part of that pillar. There's nothing separate there. And just another view of that. You can see that some of these pillars had like this hole going through them. So, and that's something about these pillars at the site. Each and every one of them have their own unique characteristics. It wasn't like I could take the pillars and just, okay, I'm just going to copy the pillar and throw it over here. I had to actually work with each pillar to get it as correct as I could for the site, which was a challenge to say the least. So here's just another view of that specific pillar, and of this one as well. You can see I've added this, what they call a H symbol. In this case, it looks like an I symbol, but the H, this type of symbol, whatever it is, it appears in a few places on the site. It's pretty interesting. And I'm just going along creating the different pillars. So you can see I've got another one created, or working on another one. And this is kind of a looking down view. At this point in time, I've got 6 of them done. And you see these blue numbers here. I put some text. If I do a top view, you can see these text, and this text falls right over the pillars. What it is it's the number of the pillars. And this is how the archaeologists have labeled these pillars. So like the very first one that they uncovered is P1, and then, you know, the last one is P, 57 or whatever it goes to, I forget. but that was a way that I could keep track of which pillar I was working on. I had my reference photos labeled also by the pillar number to try to, make sure I was working on the correct one. And here's another view of these 3 pillars. And this, at this point, because I had just way too many lines of stone, and I knew that I needed to knock that number down quite a bit, what I decided to do is use one wall of stone, and to solve the problem of light getting through it, I came up with a backing panel for the stone. So if you look very closely, you may not be able to see it in this particular image, but this backing panel actually has a texture on it with little stonework in it as well. So for close-up renders, it would help give the illusion that, there's more stonework back there. That was my solution to that anyway. And so with this image, you can kind of see that backing. It almost looks like kind of a cement type of texture on that panel that I put around the enclosure here. And it just, as you can see, definitely from a distance, it helps keep the light from coming in and just helps make it look more realistic, I think. Also, another thing that I realized was, I originally had my circle as a exact circle, and the actual enclosure is sort of more like an oval shape. So I had to work with my rings of stone individually to get them to get into the correct shape. That was a little bit of a challenge. So here's just another view of that. You can see I am working with trying to get this stuff a little bit varied here so it looks better. You can see I'm starting to put a little bit of, rocks around the pillars just to give it a little bit more realistic look. And here is a close-up of these this stonework. One thing that I did, and I kind of regretted it, but not completely, is all of this stonework, in order to save polygons, I actually did not leave any bottom on these. So they're all hollow on the bottom side. Now the problem with that is if you get a view and your camera is pointing upward, then you might see some of the holes. But later on, what I did is I kind of turned them in a little bit to try to minimize that as much as possible. So I think it was a good trade-off to lower the polygon count versus, a slight problem with maybe a camera angle or something. So, and if we see the next one, you can kind of see what I'm doing here. Definitely on the left part of the picture, you can see how I have started to rotate some of the stones. I'm starting to resize some of the stones to give it a varied kind of look so that it doesn't look like the one on the right looks like it, they just had a bricklayer or something that knew exactly, had all the right size blocks and they all fit together. But it's not that way on the site, and they're definitely use a lot of different various size stones, and they're not all perfect like a brick building or something. So that's what I was doing there. So just another view was like, when I was working on this, I noticed something on the reliefs that I was doing, and that was some of the reliefs are actually, depending on the light, the way the light is hitting the reliefs, they're not really coming out as well as what they appear to come out when you actually look at the actual reference images of reliefs on the site. So that is something that was bothering me for a while, and I needed to find a way to fix that. So just a difference in lighting there. And an overall view of what the site was looking like at the time. And for some reason I started doing this where I had a black background. It's kind of dark, and I put some shadows on there, kind of giving just a different look of what the site is looking like with different lighting. And from this point to this point was a major turning point, and it was almost a point where I said, okay, I'm going to give up. Because what I didn't realize when I was creating these, I was using all my reference images to create these pillars and everything. And the reference images, especially the ones that only show the pillars, they show what looks like a pillar that is sitting on the ground, something like that. So I guess I kind of assumed that this whole site was mostly excavated and all the pillars were kind of leveled out or whatever. But what I found out was that all the pillars that I was seeing, they were in various states of excavation. So some were sitting on higher ground, some were, they appeared to be even with others, but they were not all even like I thought they were. So this, like I said, this was a major turning point, and I had to basically raise the complete site up and start putting some ground under some of the pillars and to try to mimic what the actual enclosure looked like. So what it meant was that I was going to have to basically redo all the bottom part of the site and make sure that I had the pillars the right sizes as far as the length and all that, as at least as good as I could get them. But I knew there was a lot of, it just meant a lot more work to the site, which I kind of thought I had already finished with, or, you know, had it at least laid out right. So, like I said, major turning point. So I'm going to pause right here, and then I'm going to start another segment of this video. So I'll see you in part 2.